Hello and welcome to the i3 podcast. My name is Wouter Klein and I'm the Director of Content for the Investment Innovation Institute. For more information about our educational forums, please visit our website at www.i3-invest.com. There you can also subscribe to our complimentary newsletter i3 Insights, in which we discuss investment strategy and asset allocation questions with asset owners around the world. Now, as you might know, we love our disclaimers in this industry, so here's ours. This recording is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute financial advice. Please enjoy the show.
Welcome to the i3 Insights podcast. This is Daniel Grioli, Market Fox columnist at i3, and today we have a very special guest. His name is Tadas Viskanta. He is the Director of Investor Education at Ritholtz Wealth Management, but you may know him as the founder and editor of Abnormal Returns, an extremely popular investment blog that's been running since 2005 and proudly forecast free. Today we're going to find out a bit about Tadas and how he got started in the industry, how he started the blog, and what's happening in terms of finance and investing and social media. Tadas, welcome to the podcast.
Daniel, it's a pleasure to be on. I'm especially pleased because you've had such illustrious guests on prior to me. So I don't know if I merit their level, but I'm certainly happy to be on.
Well, a part of the philosophy of the podcast is to tell interesting stories from all parts of the finance and investment world. So we try to mix it up a lot. We've had self-made billionaires. Today we have a blogger and social media personality. At other times we've had academics, quants, fundamental investors. We've got some episodes coming up with ESG investors. We've got a real estate agent. So we really try to keep a variety on the podcast.
No, that's great. That keeps it interesting for you and for the guests.
So it's customary to find out a little bit about our guests and how they got started in finance. What's your story?
Well, I have been in and around finance for essentially my entire career. So really since graduating from university, I've been in and around the financial markets. So I feel like it's kind of in my blood, I would say.
And what do you think prompted you to choose this as a vocation and a career?
You know, that's actually an interesting question. When I was at university, I studied a number of different topics. And one of the interesting things about investing is that it really does cross it's not simply, investing really isn't just finance. It isn't just economics. It really ranges across a number of different sorts of topics. And you really have to think broadly around the world to think about investing in the proper sort of perspective. So I don't know. I think probably on some level that was helpful for me to be studying history, political science, and economics. And it just so happened to be that finance was an outlet for my interest in all of those topics. So I don't know if it was meant to be or happenstance, but I think a broad education was helpful to me in terms of being able to think about the markets from a little bit of a different perspective.
It's funny to hear you say that because through most of my career researching fund managers and meeting many fund managers from around the world, one thing that always stood out to me was that the fund managers that I considered to be the best at their jobs were all incredibly curious. And they just had these curious minds where they were interested in all sorts of facts and topics. And similar to what you said, they almost saw investing as a lens through which to explore the world.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think the one thing about investing which I think attracts those people is that you're able to, the structure I think is interesting. You're able to generate a hypothesis, whatever it might be, whether it be about an individual company or about a market, and essentially test that hypothesis. And I think for a lot of people, that process is an interesting one. And, it definitely puts your, not only your capital, but it also puts your sort of, your intellectual capabilities to the test as well.
That's right. There's a very clear method of keeping score and getting feedback.
No, that's absolutely the case.
So you're in college. You've discovered that investing in finance is interesting because it allows you to be very broad. How did you find your first job in the industry, and where did you start out?
I started off my career out of undergraduate at what is a now defunct bank, which was the First National Bank of Chicago. And I probably shouldn't say defunct, because it had been absorbed into a number of different banks, which eventually leads you back to JP Morgan Chase today. So the First National Bank of Chicago was acquired by a couple of different companies along the way before becoming a part of the broader JP Morgan Chase universe. And so that's where I started my career. And I was in a program which was probably unique in the sense that it was it hired individuals like myself, oftentimes who had liberal arts backgrounds, and provided them a 2.5-year essentially training program to allow you to go to different parts of the bank while you were studying for your MBA, either at the University of Chicago or at Northwestern at night. So it was quite a unique opportunity, and it provided me opportunities to look at different parts of the bank. And it just so happened to be that the parts of the bank that ended up being most interesting to me were ones that were either involved in the capital markets or in investing.
Okay, very good. So as a liberal arts major, did you feel somewhat different to most of the people in the bank, who I assume would have come from more of an accounting or perhaps even a maths background?
I think yes, but I think the people in my program were oftentimes in very much the same boat as me, and so oftentimes had that similar background. And so I think quite quickly you become you get a sense for the organization and how it works. And I think, your job really is to try and fit in and add value wherever you can. So I don't necessarily think that I think it's I think net it was a positive more than a detriment.
Okay. Now I noticed you threw in there attending the University of Chicago for your MBA. And as our listeners might know, that is the bastion, the fortress of the efficient markets hypothesis. How did studying at Chicago shape your thinking about investing?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that it was really an opportunity to get an education in areas which I really didn't have a background. So things like accounting and strategy. And I would have to say that I was probably less focused on investing in the program. I was really looking to fill in areas where I really didn't have a background. And so from that perspective, I thought it was useful in terms of rounding out my skills. But no, it was very much the case that, the University of Chicago, especially that time, was very much a quantitatively oriented program. And I think the ethos was very much built into the program. And so so I've always taken that quantitative sort of perspective and a need for the ability to be able to test your viewpoints against the data that's out there to be a valuable sort of grounding.
Okay, that's very interesting. So you've spent some time at the First Bank of Chicago. Was it First Bank of Chicago or First National?
It was the First National Bank of Chicago. The holding company was called First Chicago Corporation.
Okay, so you spent some time at First National Bank of Chicago and at Chicago Booth Business School. Where to from there?
Well, I was there for over a decade, and after one of the eventual bank mergers, I decided to go out on my own. And for a while, I was essentially trading my own book.
Okay. And securities, derivatives, what were you focused on?
Largely equities, and at one point I ended up co-founding a hedge fund. And out of that experience in founding that hedge fund, I really started to begin my deep dive or my interest in writing more about the financial markets for a broader audience.
Okay, it sounds like there's a story there. So what was it about running a hedge fund that turned you into an author?
Well, I'll take one step back in the sense that while I was in my corporate career, part of my job was to write research, and along with my boss and a co-author, we ended up co-authoring a number of different research papers on a variety of topics like global asset allocation, country risk, and things like that. And so in my corporate career, I kind of got the beginnings of an interest in writing for a broader audience and found that quite fulfilling. And so after my stint at the hedge fund ended, I realized that I had a little bit of this was still before the time. This is still a time when hedge funds were still, somewhat opaque in their operation. And so at that point, I had a lot of information and a lot of background on founding a hedge fund, and I had a little bit of academic interest in hedge fund returns and the research on that. And so I felt like at that point, I had a book on hedge funds in me. And so I wrote a book proposal. I wrote a couple of chapters about on that book and tried to get it published. But unfortunately, I was unable to get it published at that time. So and it just so happened to be that around that time, that's when the investment blogosphere was really kind of getting off the ground. So I felt that as a thwarted book author, an outlet for my interest in writing about the financial markets might be the blogosphere. And so that's how I took my first two steps into writing for an audience online.
That's a great story. And another common theme that you reminded me of in that story is that often with many founder-led ideas or enterprises, there's an element of frustration behind the founding of the idea.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, it's funny because at that time, if it had been easier at that time to self-publish a book, I might very well have gone on to, write that entire book and self-publish it. And, things might have turned out very differently. But, at that time, it wasn't as easy or as turnkey as it is today with Amazon and all of that. So, like I said, my interests were turned online, where I could get online for essentially for free.
Okay, so what was the early days of blogging like when you started out?
I'll provide a little bit of color on that, in the sense that when I first started blogging, I started blogging anonymously, in part because I had no idea where the blogosphere would go, and my fear at that time was that if I were to try and get another job in institutional investment management, that my blogging might be a detriment. So I know that might sound ridiculous today, but that was my thinking at the time. And so for the first couple of years that I was blogging, I was essentially blogging anonymously. And the other thing that's really interesting is that blogging was really its own thing at that time. Social media essentially didn't exist, and nor did this is essentially before the iPhone, before Facebook, before Twitter, before any of those things. And so blogging was really a thing in and of itself, and was kind of its own self-contained universe.
And do you know who was reading the blogs at the time?
Oh, well, it's funny because there are a couple of people. Bloggers were oftentimes reading, reading each other. That was oftentimes your only audience. And so a couple of people that I remember who were blogging at that very same time. One is Eddie Elfenbein at Crossing Wall Street, and now he is the manager of a ETF. And another person who's gone on to great distinction is Joe Weisenthal, who's now at Bloomberg and previously at Business Insider, and he was blogging at that time as well. Those were a couple of the first people who linked to my blog at that time. So I'm indebted to them for recognizing what I was doing at that time, and I'm happy to see that they are still very much a part of, have been successful and are still very much a part of the broader investment and financial world.
Okay, so you've created the blog. There's this small nascent group of bloggers out there writing about investment-related topics in a world long before social media. How long did it take before people started to really engage with your content? Were you an overnight success, or did it take some time?
No, I think like any of this, it takes time. And I would say that, I don't know if I'm unique in this aspect, but, Abnormal Returns has really just been just an upward, it's just kind of been on an upward slope from the beginning. And certainly, it's really just kind of been a slow climb up. And so I don't think there was any point in time where there was some sort of aha moment where there was a big spike in traffic and it became that it ever became some sort of big sensation. But I think the nature of how I blog and the nature of the readership has really just kind of been a steady upward trend. And so, I know other people have been much more overnight sensations in this field, but mine has been one of just sort of slow, steady progress.
Okay, so persistence pays off.
Well, yeah, I don't know if it's persistence or stubbornness or stupidity, but I'm not sure which it is, but here I am. So.
Okay, so what are some things that you've discovered through trial and error during this time since 2005 when you started Abnormal Returns?
That's a great question. I mean, from my own perspective, I have really, it's interesting that really a couple of things have really stood the test of time. And so, like I said, I don't know whether that's good luck or stubbornness, but when I did tag the blog a forecast-free investment blog, it was very much a reaction to at least what was going on at the time in the blogosphere. And it was very much, the blogs at that time were very much an arena for people to put out forecasts and to make predictions about various sorts of stocks and the economy and the stock market. And that to me wasn't particularly interesting for any number of reasons, one of which was that oftentimes bloggers would make these predictions and then not follow up on the outcomes. And so I felt that was kind of a cheat. And I thought that wasn't really that didn't serve the readership well. And so when I started blogging, my interest was a couple of things. One was to take a little bit of a longer term perspective and to hopefully provide much more in the way of educational content for the readership. And so that has always been kind of my thought process there. And I've really always just kind of used one kind of rule of thumb for myself. And if I found something interesting, I would blog about it or link to it. And that was really kind of the only standard. So I'm sure the things that I thought were interesting 5 years ago, 10 years ago, are different than the stuff that I find interesting today. And so I guess I'm just gratified that people have kind of either stuck with me along the way or have come on board over time.
So you mentioned the importance of finding content that's interesting and relevant. And you're well known for your blog links. And I've been pleased to see some of the things that I've written appear there from time to time. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
But how do you find the time to find all this interesting material? How do you organize yourself?
Well, I don't know that I've ever organized myself. I really look at, essentially, I take in information from all sorts of different sources and really just kind of use a framework to, like I said, find those things that are hopefully interesting and relevant. And so it does take some time. And that's kind of, I was joking earlier about kind of the trajectory of the blog. And when I said, I don't know that there is a whole lot of competition for what I do, in part because I don't, like I said, I may have been stupid to stick with it as long as I did. So it does take a lot of time, and it does take a lot of effort to comb through all of that information. And so it has been a sacrifice over time to kind of stick with it. And I think that, if nothing else, doing this on a daily basis provides me the opportunity to see the flow of information, see how different sorts of topics evolve over time. And I think that is one of the benefits of doing this on kind of on a daily basis. And it's interesting because when I first started blogging, I thought I would be writing, oftentimes I thought I'd be writing, longer blog posts, book reviews, and things like that. And I quickly realized that there are a lot of other people who are very good writers, and it felt redundant to write on topics that they have already covered when I could simply link to them and say, go read this. They did a much better job writing about this than I ever could. So again, it kind of felt like a cheat. It feels like a cheat to write about a same topic if you're not going to do it as well or better than somebody else.
It's really interesting to hear how you found your niche there through trial and error. You mentioned that you tend to follow your interests through your blogs. What are you interested in now?
Oh, well, it's interesting. We talked a little bit about it before starting the podcast, and I think this entire ESG movement, and it goes by a number of different names, but I think is actually quite fascinating. Not just from an investment perspective, from a social perspective as well. And this idea that investors can bring their values broadly stated to the financial markets. And I think I think that is going to be increasingly a topic for investment. And so it may not necessarily, I think that's just the nature of certainly of these last couple of generations that have come into the workforce and come into the area of investing, that these topics are of interest in them and important to them. And I think over time, these ideas are going to become essentially integrated into how we think about investments. And so I think that's always a fascinating topic to think about.
I would agree, and I think technology is probably going to make that easier because it allows for mass customization. It allows us to give investors what they want, but at the same time be scalable. So I expect there'll be a lot more happening in that area.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because a lot of the debate about ESG investing is about whether, the returns from different sorts of strategies or screens are going to provide, better returns or returns that are equal to the market. And I think that's somewhat beside the point. I think that what's interesting about ESG is that by aligning your portfolio with your worldview, it provides you the impetus to stick with that portfolio over time. And so I think that it's more of a behavioral sort of aspect to it that's more interesting to me than the actual underlying investment performance aspect.
I think that's a really good point because so much of the investment-related discussion on ESG that you mentioned, I've seen a lot of it where the debate is really conflating several issues. So, for example, you'll get somebody that will create a low-carbon ESG index and then point at the performance and say it's beaten whichever market over this period, and totally neglect to mention the fact that the low-carbon nature means it is skewed away from industrial companies and more towards services and technology companies, and that if you adjust for the sector exposures, that explains most of the outperformance. And you get all these other issues mixed in, and it's very hard to tell whether it's the ESG or something else that's driving the result. But as you point out, that almost or probably doesn't matter at all. It's really about helping the end investor be comfortable with their portfolio so that, as you say, they have the discipline to stick with their strategy.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And kind of, you mentioned this ability to look at factors. And I think, that has been another topic which is frankly, hard to ignore for anybody who has been watching, reading the blogosphere or reading the financial media over the last couple of years, this idea of being able to look at factors, and not just look at factors, but be able to invest in them in some form or fashion, oftentimes through an ETF has become oftentimes the way that we talk about investing now. And that granularity provides us much more insight into the performance of strategies and managers. And I think, that has been another area that has been of particular interest to me over the last, I'd say maybe year or two.
Any other areas on your radar?
Well, I think technology, broadly stated, is a fascinating one. I think, here in the U.S., we talk about the FANG stocks. We talk about Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, and Facebook. And I think it's almost hard not to talk about them. I think not only their financial impact on the markets is large, but also their impact on society and just how we communicate is a big one. And I think just following those stocks and the things and the companies and how it is that they are essentially shaping our society in some very significant ways is an important one to stay on top of. And so, I'm talking to you on Skype, which is a Microsoft product. I have my Apple phone next to me, and it's essentially these companies are very much baked into our daily lives, and thinking about the implications of that is not only interesting but probably necessary.
Definitely, particularly because, as we're increasingly finding out, not all of the implications are good, or we may not fully understand their effects.
No, I think that's absolutely the case. I think we are, as with much in the way of technological change, we are learning these lessons over time. And so, I think that's absolutely the case.
We're living in a live experiment.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to circle back to something that you said earlier when we were talking about the beginnings of abnormal returns. You mentioned that you started out anonymously because you weren't sure whether the blog would in some way limit your future career prospects. When did you decide to go public? When did you decide, you know what, I'm comfortable now? And what led you to that decision?
Well, there was a couple of different things going on. One is once I made the decision to try and for those first couple of years, I didn't I was essentially blogging for free. There wasn't any revenue involved. And so once I decided that I was going to try and generate some revenue through the blog, whether it be through advertising or through other means, I felt it necessary to put a name and the face on the blog. And so that was really the impetus to become public and to essentially, for lack of a better term, professionalize what I was doing.
And how do you get that balance right when you decide to add revenue earning capabilities to a blog?
Well, I would love to tell you there's some sort of formula, but for me it's been it's been a 12 to 13 year challenge, and so the nature of abnormal returns and the way that I blog is really not conducive to generating revenue. And so whether it be through advertisements or through other means. So I have tried any number of different experiments on how to monetize the content on the blog. And I have to admit that I have probably not been altogether successful. And so my bottom line on that is that the blog has to be a part of a larger sort of personal or professional sort of portfolio. It's probably in that perspective that the blog has been, sort of most valuable for me in terms of being able to meet a whole host of people and to make different sorts of connections and to expose myself to different sorts of opportunities that may not necessarily be revenue generating in a sort of traditional sense, but in a broader perspective has been fulfilling and quite valuable to me.
I couldn't agree more, and I think our conversation is a good example of that because we met basically through my blogging, and I've met a lot of other fantastic people through my blogging as well, some of which are friends, some of which are clients. Can you give us some examples of people that you've met through your writing and work?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. In fact, it's interesting. It's interesting that you say that, because I've had this conversation with other people who are active online, whether it be through the blogs or through financial Twitter. And I always get a kick out of meeting those people in person, because it's hard to explain to people who are not involved in, like I said, financial Twitter, the blogosphere, for me to be able to call someone a friend, even though I've never actually met them in real life, but that's actually the case. And so it's kind of a kick to be able to do that and to actually end up meeting people in real life. And so actually, it's interesting, because my current position today at Ritholtz Wealth Management is really a function of my my experience in the blogosphere, and the fact that I have essentially, before I joined Ritholtz a few months ago, I essentially was familiar with all of the principles there, because we'd all been blogging in some form or fashion, and had communicated prior to ever thinking about doing anything together professionally. So, I would say my current position is one that is, a direct result of what I've been doing online for the last decade or so.
I love the journey that you've described there. You've gone from a side experiment that you've kept anonymous because you were justifiably nervous that it might affect your career, to actually starting a new part of your career that was 100% a result of that blog.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's come full circle, to say the least.
So tell us about what you're doing at Ritholtz Wealth Management. You're Director of Investor Education, but what does that really mean?
Well, one of the great things about not only the firm, but my position at the firm, is that it allows me to continue doing what I've been doing every day for all these many years. So I'm continuing to write the Abnormal Returns blog on a daily basis, and hopefully close followers of the blog hopefully have not seen anything change over the last few months. So hopefully I've been able to maintain the quality and the pace of writing. And so it's really the Director of Investor Education. My role is really to help amplify what existing bloggers at the firm are doing, and get that content out to not only our current clients, but prospective clients, and to the broader world. And so, at the firm, we have, some of the highest profile people in the financial blogosphere. And so it's really kind of a pleasure to be able to work with them on a closer basis, and to be able to see that process play out over time. And so the firm is built on this idea of communicating directly to clients or potential clients, or to the broader public. One
of the things I have noticed in reading the material that the people at Ritholtz have put out is that it's very authentic. They're not shy of allowing their personality to come out, whether it's through their writing or their video or their podcasts. And it's funny, because I see a lot of larger mainstream financial organizations, they've suddenly discovered, it seems, the importance of social media to reach people. And you can see that their attempts to use it have been through their legal and compliance department, and they're just so sanitized, and it's almost like they're treating the web as a digital version of their monthly performance report, and totally missing what the internet and the interaction it allows you to have is all about. Do you have any tips or suggestions for how people can be more effective, and any words of encouragement to other people, other bloggers out there, to be themselves, and why that's important?
Well, I could not agree with you more on that statement. I would agree with you 100% on that. And so, I think it is, I think it's absolutely the case in what you said. And I think that authenticity is a key part of the success in anybody writing online. And so, what I think distinguishes people who are good at blogging is that they are essentially writing about things that they find interesting. And sometimes those things are on topic on what's happening in the financial markets. And sometimes they're tangential, and sometimes they're wholly unrelated. But so long as they are writing about things that they're interesting, they're likely to continue to do that. And it's through that process, like you said, that you really do kind of not only build your writing muscles, but you build an audience and you build essentially a voice for yourself. And so that is very much, that is 180 degrees removed from, like you said, the corporate sort of perspective where, a larger corporation or larger organization says, look, we need to reach our clientele in a certain fashion, and so we're going to build backwards from that. It's a completely different sort of process, and so that's oftentimes why that approach fails to reach an audience in any sort of interesting way. And so in my prior career, I have written those monthly or quarterly performance sorts of reports, and they are largely, frankly, they're pro forma. Nobody reads those because they're not written, with a viewpoint or in an interesting fashion. And those people that do write from that sort of perspective, and so an example of that is Howard Marks, who's the chairman of Oaktree, and he's out on the kind of the tour now promoting his most recent book. But he's essentially, he's been writing, he's kind of a blogger before he was a blogger. He's been writing his monthly chairman reports for a long time, and he essentially has been writing about things that he finds interesting, and he found an audience for that, and is really, he's an example of, like I said, he's essentially been blogging before there were ever blogs, and he's one of those sorts of investment professionals who was able to find a voice and not in a kind of, a structured, formal, corporate sort of way.
It's interesting to hear you bring up Howard Marks. I was listening to his recent podcast with your boss, Barry Ritholtz, and one of the things that he mentioned there was that he thought when he began writing his memos and books that his audience would primarily be other investment professionals, and that the audience would be quite small. And what he's discovered over time is that the audience is far larger and far more mainstream than he ever would have thought. And I thought that was very interesting.
I think that's a function of his writing. I mean, I think another example, it's a bit of a cliche at this point, but, if you think about the Warren Buffett shareholder letters, which he's been writing for, going on 50 years now, he is quite frank and in those letters, and writes in a approachable sort of way. And when he needs to admit mistakes that he's made along the way, he does so. And I think that's why people find him, as multi-billionaires go, quite approachable in that sort of perspective. And so I think that authenticity is kind of shines through. And I think that's another example of how being forthright and open and transparent, I think, reaches people in a very specific way.
I think there's a common thread through all of the people that we've discussed, in that whether it be the team at Ritholtz or Howard Marks at Oaktree or Warren Buffett at Berkshire, I think these people, and yourself too, are able to be authentic because they're in a role where they have skin in the game, basically. And by that, what I mean is they're effectively principals in a business where they really want that business to grow. They're personally and financially invested in that business. And that gives them the scope and the freedom as well to really be authentic. And I think where a lot of corporate media and information falls down is that you have this large amorphous organization, and the people preparing the information often don't really have ownership over what they do or skin in the game. And I think that affects things. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Oh, I think that's absolutely the case. I think, the more layers that a piece of paper or a document gets passed through, the less likely that, all of the kind of the sharp edges are going to get sanded down, and that end result is going to be, certainly perfectly palatable from a corporate perspective, but likely is going to be dull as dishwater from a reader's perspective.
Very good. So in your role at Ritholtz, what are some areas that you're focusing on at the moment in terms of investor education?
Well, like I said, I think part of my challenge is a bit of trying to deal with a cornucopia of great content. We have so many great writers, and part of the challenge is, from my perspective, and part of my role is really just to highlight the best of our work, and when necessary, go back into our archives and bring forth content that might be relevant to what's happening today. So, it's part of it's almost, it's an interesting challenge for that perspective. It's almost, from that perspective, it's really trying to find that content and amplify it and bring it forth so that not only our clients can get the best of it, but also a broader audience as well.
When did you think that blogging content became acceptable to use with clients? And by that, what I mean, I'm sort of casting my mind back, and I'm thinking to a time when financial advisors, to back up their advice, would produce research reports created by a bank or a research consultancy or whoever. When did it become okay to actually bring out a blog and say, hey, I think you should do this, and this blog explains why?
Well, here's what I think. Here's my hypothesis on that. I think the great financial crisis was essentially the catalyst for the phenomenon that you're discussing. Essentially, we all were flying in the dark from from 2008 through 2009. We were essentially living in unprecedented times in the financial markets and in the broader economy. And so what happened during that time period was that things were moving so quickly. And like I said, we're facing such unprecedented sorts of convulsions that people started to, the mainstream media started to look at bloggers who either had firsthand experience in mortgage-backed securities or these other sorts of, or had experience in monetary economics. And I think that was really the time where people started to look at these things and say, people who have firsthand experience and know what they're talking about are writing about this stuff online, and we have to start paying attention to it. And I think it was really that period of, it certainly was a dark and dangerous sort of time for the global economy. But out of that came a different sort of perspective about, a broader use of sources and being able to look at blogs as being somewhat more authoritative.
I think there's also a trust element in there as well, that maybe people no longer trusted the big established news sources through that process that you described.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's part of it, but I think it was really I think everybody was trying to figure it out as we went along, and I think you look for whatever whatever sort of information you can. It just so happened to be that on a lot of blogs there were people who did have some of that experience and were able to provide perspective that other sources weren't able to do, or the investment banks weren't able to do because they were in some form or fashion conflicted.
Mm-hmm. Very true. So in terms of client acceptance, how do clients respond when you use blog content with them?
The interesting thing about, Ritholtz Wealth Management is that the firm was really built. All of the principals were blogging before they started managing money. So it's really just part and parcel of the process. And I think that, one of the great things about the clients of the firm know that there are, a number of people who are watching what's going on in the markets, are thinking about investing, and are writing it about on a daily basis. They don't need to wait for a call from their advisor or to wait for the monthly or quarterly report from the firm. They know that they're, whether it be on one of the blogs or on Twitter, there is going to be some member of the firm that is, out there talking about what's going on.
I think that's a very important point because, casting my mind back to the old days, essentially financial advice was largely getting somebody to fill out a questionnaire that then was used to determine their asset allocation, and after that you showed them a whole bunch of glossy mutual fund brochures and pick funds to populate that asset allocation and met with them periodically. Whereas what you're describing now is that there's a very strong education element to it, and it's more of almost a conversation in some ways where you've got these people that you trust, that you know are looking out for you, and they're always telling you what's on their mind. And in some ways that's reassuring because it helps you know that you're on track.
That's an interesting point. I have, in my role, I have started writing a periodic email to clients of the firm that, highlights some of our content and content from around the web. And it's been well received by clients. And one of the clients wrote back and said, I don't necessarily read the entire email, but I'm just glad that I know that there's somebody out there, reading this and writing this, and just knowing that I get the email makes me feel better about what's going on. And so I think that touches on exactly what you're saying in terms of that, building that sort of relationship. And I'm sure there are clients of the firm who don't read any of the blogs, but might feel that they are, if they ever feel the need to, they can turn to them at any time. So.
That's the funny thing about blogging, isn't it? Sometimes the things that you take the most pride and joy in writing, nobody reads. And then the pieces that you think were quite average, you get blown away by how many people like it.
It's absolutely a crapshoot. That has been my experience, and I think every other blogger's experience is that, you might spend hours or days or weeks agonizing over some sort of post that you think is breaking new ground, and it lands with quite a thud, and then something else that you've just tossed off in a half an hour becomes much more popular. And so it's very much like I said, it's very much a crapshoot from that perspective.
So for all of the advisors and wealth managers out there that are hearing things along the lines of, if you're not on social media, you won't have a business, is that overstating things? Does everybody have to blog and podcast, or is it not for everybody?
I think that's absolutely the case. I think you mentioned the word earlier this year. I think you have to be authentic. And if doing a podcast or writing a blog is not authentic for you, then there's nothing worse than trying to force your business or your personality into something that it isn't. And so inauthenticity is something that people see quite quickly. And there's no single way to communicate with your clients. There are a number of different ways, and I think you have to find the way that works best for you and for your clients. And so saying that you have to do one thing or another, I think, is far too pat of an answer.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions to wrap up before we let you go. So the first one's a little bit of a tough question. What were some things that you've had to learn over your career the hard way?
Oh, well, we touched on one of them, is that, when writing for a broader audience, it's really difficult ahead of time to identify which of those topics are going to be popular and which ones of them will not. And so I think you have to sort of let go a bit of your expectations in that regard. And so once you hit publish, you have to feel good about what it is that you've written and realize that at that point, it's largely out of your hands whether that piece is going to take off or land like a thud.
Very good. And obviously you're an avid reader of blogs. Are there any blogs that you'd like to call out as being particularly helpful? Maybe give us some of your secrets.
Oh, I don't know that I have. Well, the fact is that there aren't any secrets. Every day, if you come to the blog every day, you're seeing those things that I think are, interesting and meaningful. And so, it might take you a full week to cycle through all of the posts. Because I do some specialized posts during the week, but in that sense there are no secrets. There are no blogs that I have kind of squirreled away for my own pleasure. If I like it, I'm going to tell the broader world about them. So
very good. And how about books? Anything that you're into at the moment?
I'm reading a couple of books right now. One of which is investing related, and that's called Adaptive Markets, and it's by a professor at MIT called Andrew Lo. And so it's a big book, and it's taking me a little while to work through it, but I think it's an interesting perspective. We talked about the University of Chicago earlier and this idea of efficient markets, and Lo has kind of taken some of the best of financial theory and kind of, layering on top of that all of that we have learned about behavioral finance and economics, and is trying to find some, for lack of a better term, a third way. And I think it's an interesting book. And another book that I also have on my nightstand as well is by Michael Pollan, who listeners might know as having written about food topics over the last decade or so, but he just wrote a book called How to Change Your Mind, which talks about the new science of psychedelics, and it's kind of a first-hand account of that. And I think it's again, that's another book that has kind of struck my fancy as well.
There's a broad range in topics, reconciling efficient market theory with behavioral finance, all the way through to the applications of psychedelics.
Yeah, no, it's well, like we said, the world is changing quite rapidly, and so I think the more we learn about that, the better.
Very good. Well, Tadas, thank you very much for your time. It's been great to chat with you and find out more about your blog and how you got there. And we hope to chat with you again soon, and we hope that you continue to put out such excellent reading material on a daily basis.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it, and keep up the good work, both on the blog and with the podcast.
Thank you for listening to the i3 podcast. For more information, please visit www.i3-invest.com. Thank you very much.